Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on desktop support best practices. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I'll pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast typically lasts about 90 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. My role in the company is to manage the desktop support, service desk, and call center benchmarks for MetricNet. The work we do for desktop support groups worldwide really spans the gambit, from best practices assessments to benchmarks and consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the desktop support groups that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not been to our new website, I want to encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a unique free membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our online content. This includes our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you'll be enrolled as a free member. Now, each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to the resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I'll preempt that question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are what we call peer group benchmarks that compare your desktop support group, service desk, or call center to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button, and you will see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of IT service and support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. For those who would like to follow us on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate and share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just follow along. Now, for those who are attending the HDI conference next month in Orlando in April, I want to make you aware that MetricNet has been selected by HDI to deliver two presentations at this year's conference. The first presentation is about key performance indicators for desktop support and how you can use desktop support KPIs diagnostically and holistically. This is session 309, and it's scheduled for Wednesday, April 2nd at 3 p.m. The second presentation is about leveraging KPIs to drive a high ROI, return on investment in service and support. This is session 607. And it's scheduled for Thursday, April 3rd at 2:45 in the afternoon. For those who are interested, we want to welcome you and encourage you to attend one or both of those sessions at the conference. Also, in case you're interested in scheduling a meeting with MetricNet at the conference, you can do so directly on our website. Just go to the URL shown up here, metricnet.com/HDI-2014, and you'll see a tab that pulls up a calendar where you can reserve a meeting time with MetricNet. Now, one final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of the presentation. The survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. Real briefly, what we've got on the agenda today is an overview of what we call industry megatrends, a historical perspective on how and why service and support is becoming more strategically important within the IT organization. I'll spend a few minutes on that just to set the stage for our desktop support best practices model. This is a model that's based on empirical observation. It contains 4 components. We look at desktop support strategy, performance measurement, human resource management, and marketing, which is really about managing your internal message to make sure that you get credit for the good work that you do within an organization. Then we're going to have a call to action, and I'm going to summarize what we've learned today and talk about 4 or 5 things that you can do almost immediately to gain some benefit from today's webcast. So let's go ahead and get started with our historical perspective. One thing I want to make clear before we get going here is that everything you see and hear is based on empirical observation. There's nothing hypothetical or theoretical about what we present today. There's nothing academic about it. This is simply based upon more than 2,800 IT service and support benchmarks that we have done over the last 26 years. We've created the world's largest database of IT process and performance indicators for service and support. We have identified more than 70 KPIs that are frequently used in service and support, and we have also defined and cataloged, created a taxonomy, if you will, of more than 120 industry best practices. Now, one of the things that's helpful in understanding the evolution of support in general, but desktop support in particular, is to look at how some of the key performance indicators have evolved over the past quarter century. What I'm showing here on page 9 are some KPIs and what their values were in 1988 in North American averages, and what their values were last year, starting with the number of desktop tickets per seat per month. Back in 1988, the average user called desktop support about once every 2 months, meaning a half a ticket per end user per month. Last year, the number was almost 0.8. This is a reflection of the fact that the average knowledge worker now has more devices and more complexity at their fingertips than they have historically. Your typical knowledge worker now has almost 3 devices. They might have a smartphone, a laptop computer, desktop computer, tablet computer. There's all sorts of devices. We've even got clients that have servers and printers in their offices. But the more technology you put at the disposal of a knowledge worker, the more likely will be the need for technical support. And that's reflected here in the growth in the number of tickets per user per month, going from a half a ticket per user per month to almost 0.8 tickets per user per month. Back in 1988, the cost per ticket, fully loaded, this is all salaries and benefits, plus the indirect cost for supervisors, team leads, workforce schedulers, and the like, plus the facilities expense, the telecommunications expense, the desktop technology, the travel, the training, the office supplies, all of the costs associated with desktop support divided by all the tickets. Cost in 1988 was about $29. Last year, that cost had risen to $62. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. One reason is that the average incident work time has almost doubled. It's gone from 17 minutes and 40 seconds to about 32 minutes. This is just the work time per incident, not the travel time per incident. In desktop support, you have a travel component for every ticket. You get up, you walk to the side of the user, you fix their problem, you go back to your office or you go to your next call. So we're not talking about travel time here. We're simply talking about incident work time. It's nearly doubled in the last 25 years. Now, the number of incidents resolved on first contact has actually declined. It's gone from 74%, meaning first visit resolution rate. The technician goes out to the site of the user, they troubleshoot, they get it resolved 74% of the time. That number now is only 68%. So you look at that and you think, wow, things are going backwards. Not only is the incident work time longer, but the FCR, incident first contact resolution rate at the side of the user, is less. But there's more to the story than that. If we look at a metric called percent resolved level 1 capable, I know that's a mouthful, but it's a very important metric in desktop support. This looks at the percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could have and should have been resolved by the level 1 service desk. In 1988, more than half, 54% of the tickets being resolved by desktop support could have and should have been resolved at level 1. And that's one of the reasons the FCR was so high, is because there were a lot of gimmies in here. In other words, these tickets that can and should be resolved at level 1 are usually pretty simple to resolve on site. I'm not suggesting that they're simple tickets, but they are relatively straightforward to resolve on site. But as managers began to recognize that these tickets represented defects and that the cost of resolution at $62 per ticket is significantly higher than resolving at level 1, they decided to make it their mission to try and reduce the number of tickets resolved at desktop support that could and should be resolved at level 1. So the number dropped pretty dramatically. It's now, or last year I should say, the average in North America percent resolved level 1 capable was 22%. So let's just make up a number. Let's say you've got a desktop support group handling 1,000 tickets per month. About 220 of those tickets on average could have and should have been resolved at level 1. But the number ranges from a low of about 4 or 5% to a high of still in excess of 50%. This is a very positive trend. The percent resolved level 1 capable, these are defects escalated from level 1 or that should have been resolved at level 1. That number is down substantially in the last 25 years, and that's one of the reasons that the incident FCR has also declined somewhat. It's down about 6 percentage points in the last 25 years because the mix of tickets has become more complex. Naturally, when you have fewer of these level 1 resolvable tickets, only 22% versus 54%, that's a more complex ticket set. And as a result, the FCR, incident first visit resolution rate, has decreased by about 6 percentage points since 1988. Also, if we look at starting technician salaries, back in 1988, the starting salaries were about $37,000, and that's adjusted for last year's wage rate. In other words, we've adjusted for inflation. The average entry-level technician in North America for desktop support now makes about $43,600. Now, the number varies pretty dramatically. When you hire people out in Silicon Valley, say in Sunnyvale, California, you can't even get somebody to show up for an interview unless you're offering $60,000, $65,000 for desktop support tech. By contrast, if you're down on the Gulf Coast, say Biloxi or someplace, or Paducah, Kentucky, or someplace like that, you can get pretty good desktop support techs for about $30,000 per year. That just reflects the differences in cost of living and wage rates across the country. But it is still a notable trend that the starting salaries have gone up. Now, the reason for this is not because of the benevolence of IT or any altruism on the part of desktop support. It's a recognition of the fact that when you pay a little bit more for starting tech, and this is true, by the way, at level 1 in the service desk as well, when you're willing to pay a little bit more, you get a more experienced, you get a more qualified, and you get a better educated desktop support tech. The result of that is a lower percent resolved level 1 capable, higher incident first contact resolution rate, lower work times, and hence lower cost per ticket at desktop support. So there's a counterintuitive thing here. We call it the wage rate paradox, and it's a U-shaped curve. If you can imagine a two-dimensional X and Y axis, the X-axis is starting salary and the Y-axis is cost per ticket. The curve is U-shaped, meaning that if you go off and you hire a bunch of people at $20,000 per year, your cost per ticket will be quite high. As you increase that salary all the way up to, on average, in North America, about $50,000, the actual cost per ticket comes down, again, because you're getting a more qualified, more experienced, better educated technician. When you get past $50,000, the curve starts to turn back up, meaning that the cost per ticket starts to go up again. But it is strongly influenced by technician salaries because this is a labor-intensive function. In fact, 70% of the cost of desktop support is tied up in salaries and benefits, not just for the technicians, but also the indirect personnel like the trainers, the workforce schedulers, the supervisors, and the like. So the point here is that as CIOs and support technicians or support managers began to recognize this wage rate paradox, they managed to convince their superiors that if we pay a little bit more, our costs aren't going to go up. They're actually going to go down. And that's what we call the wage rate paradox. It's true at level 1, and it's true at desktop support. In 1988, the average cost of supporting an end user for a year was just under $200. Last year, that number was almost $600. Why? Well, you got more tickets per user. You got a much higher cost per ticket. When you put all that together, you're spending about $600 on desktop support per end user per year. So the industry has changed pretty dramatically, and there's a lot of things that have changed. Not just the higher salaries, but also the recognition that these are defects. That is, a ticket resolved at desktop support that could have and should have been resolved at level 1 is a defect. It's important to drive high first visit resolution rates. That helps drive customer satisfaction. and the recognition that there's simply more tickets per end user per month or per year now than there were 25 years ago because the desktop environment has become so much more complex. Now today as we go through our session, I will at various times use the terminology ticket, incident, and service request. Now the vernacular, and not everybody follows this same vernacular, but for the purposes of this presentation it's important to define these terms. An incident represents unplanned work that requires some physical touch to a device. It might be a hardware break fix, a device failure, a connectivity failure. A service request, by contrast, is typically planned work that requires a physical touch. It could be a move, add, change. It might be a hardware, software upgrade, a device refresh, or device setup. But your incident volume plus your service request volume equals your ticket volume. So tickets are comprised of all incidents plus service requests. Now incidents are typically have shorter service levels, mean times to resolve are less, and the cost per incident is typically less. Service levels, by contrast, have a longer mean time to resolve, and hence the cost per service request is typically higher than the cost per incident is. But again, you put it all together, and these represent the totality of the tickets. Again, not everybody uses this vernacular, but for the purposes of this presentation, I want to make this distinction between incidents and service requests, which in combination make up the total ticket volume. I will also use the terminology best practices or world-class throughout the presentation, and I'd like to define what that is right now. There are 4 components of the definition, and the first is that desktop support consistently exceeds customer expectations, and what that means is that your customer satisfaction will be in the top quartile. If your customer sat is 93% or above, you're in the top quartile. But it also is a service level issue. Your mean time to resolve should be below average for both incidents and service requests. The average mean time to resolve for an incident is 0.7 of 1 business day. The average time to fulfill a service request in worldwide actually is 3.8 business days. So as long as you're achieving high quality, above 93% customer satisfaction, and your mean times to resolve are below these thresholds, you've fulfilled one of the criteria for what we consider to be a world-class desktop support organization. But being high quality by itself is not good enough. You also have to manage your costs very aggressively, and this means that your cost per ticket, per incident, and per service request needs to be below some peer group average, and I'll define what a peer group is a little bit later. And you minimize your total cost of ownership by minimizing the percent resolved level 1 capable. Ideally, when you get these tickets, you ought to push them back to level 1. We realize that's not always possible. Level 1 may be overflowing with tickets, and that might be one of the reasons they're pushing tickets out to desktop support. But in general, you need to be pushing these defects back to level 1. That helps you minimize your total cost of ownership because the resolution at level 1 last year in North America was about $22 per ticket. Last year for desktop support, $62 per ticket. So pushing those tickets back to level 1 is an appropriate thing to do if it can be resolved at level 1. The third and more subjective criteria is that you follow industry best practices. Now the good news is industry best practices are pretty well defined and documented now. And in fact, what we're going through today is an abbreviation of a full day seminar that we do on desktop support best practices. We've just sort of skinnied it down to 90 minutes of the essential industry best practices. So they're well documented now. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to go out there and figure this out through trial and error. You simply have to follow these industry best practices. That's the third criteria. And then the fourth criteria of being world-class is that you add value on every single transaction. Now, adding value on every transaction means that each customer has a positive experience, and this also drives a positive view of IT overall. You're going to see some data a little bit later in this presentation that shows you just how much leverage there is in service and support. The majority of customer opinion about all of IT, not just service and support, but all of IT, is a function of interactions that your end users have with service and support, both at level 1 and at desktop support. Now, a different way of looking at the whole issue of best practices or world-class performance is to look at cost per ticket versus quality. Quality would be customer satisfaction. Cost per ticket is just that, cost per ticket. And if we put some data points on this chart, that's what these blue circles represent here, data from our benchmarking database, we see that there's clearly a correlation between cost and quality. And it's not just a correlation, it is a cause and effect relationship. Now, sometimes cost drives quality. If your organization is cost constrained, what you're going to do is deploy those resources the best you can to achieve the highest possible quality. In some organizations, they are driven more by quality than cost, meaning that the cost constraint isn't so strong, and they are tasked to achieve a certain level of customer satisfaction or a certain set of service levels, and quality in that case will drive cost. So in some cases you've got quality driving cost, in other cases you've got cost driving quality. It's usually a little bit of both. But this is not just a spurious correlation, it is a cause and effect relationship. Now for those organizations that manage to optimize their performance, they will end up on this green curve. This is what we call the best-in-class performance curve. This is the curve whereby you have taken the limited resources you have, the budget, the headcount, the dollars, the technology, the office space, and everything else, and you deploy those in such a way that you achieve the best possible result. Now the reason I'm making this point is as follows. We get asked every day what it means to be world-class in desktop support. Does that mean my cost per ticket is under $50? Does that mean my customer satisfaction is over 90%? Does that mean that the incident first visit resolution rate is above 80%? And the answer is it really depends upon what resources you have at your disposal. We've seen some desktop support groups that are only spending $20 or $25 a ticket, but they manage to eke out a pretty good level of customer satisfaction with those limited resources. In other words, they are achieving the best possible result with the resources they have. We would consider them to be world-class. By contrast, we've worked with companies that are spending well over $1,000 a ticket, but they do not achieve, in our opinion, the level of performance that they should, given that they're spending $1,000 a ticket. So even though this second organization is achieving a higher quality on an absolute basis, they are not achieving what we believe to be the best possible result with that $1,000 per ticket that they are spending. So being world-class is not about achieving any specific service level, cost per ticket, customer satisfaction, first visit resolution rate, or anything else. It's about taking the limited resources you have, whether it's $50 a ticket, $10 a ticket, or $1,000 a ticket, and deploying that in such a way that you achieve the absolute best possible result. Now that brings us to our first polling question of the day. And the polling question, as you can imagine, has to do with industry being best practices and being world-class. So let me open up that polling question. And here's the polling question. Do you consider your desktop support function to be world-class based on the definition I've just given you? Remember, there's four components, sorry. Your quality is above average, your cost is below average, you follow industry best practices, and you add value on every single transaction. So do you consider desktop support to be world-class? Okay, about 70% of you have weighed in here. If you have not yet weighed in, please do so. Participate in our poll. Do you consider your desktop support function to be world-class? Okay, we've got almost 90% participation. Give you just another couple seconds here to weigh in on this poll. Do you consider your desktop support function to be world-class? Okay, what I'm going to do is close that poll down and share the results with you. Okay, we've got about a 2-to-1 ratio, no's to yeses, and that's a fairly typical result. About a third of you, actually, of those that responded, yeah, about a third, consider yourselves to be world-class. In other words, based on the definition I just presented, you consider your desktop support function to be world-class. Another 60% say no, and then 10% not applicable. Perhaps you're a consultant in the industry, or you're an outsourcer or something like that, but you don't actually have direct control over a desktop support group. This is a pretty common result, getting a ratio of 2-to-1 no's to yeses. But let me offer some encouragement for those that don't yet consider their desktop support function to be world-class. Getting there is not terribly time-consuming. It is not terribly costly. And if you follow the prescription that we're going to outline here over the next hour and 10 minutes, I believe that you can achieve best practices and world-class performance in a relatively short period of time. It doesn't have to take months or worse, years. You can get it done in weeks. So I want to offer up that encouragement. There's not that much of a gap between, it doesn't take that long, I should say, take that much time and money to close the gap between where you are right now and what would be considered world-class performance according to the definition that I just provided. So let me go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now in our best practices discussion, and we're going to begin a discussion of our model for industry best practices. Now this is a 4-part model that addresses service and support strategy, it addresses performance metrics, human resource management, and what we call marketing, which is really about managing your internal message. Now, you'll note that these 4 components of the model are all arrayed around the central objective of customer enthusiasm. Not customer satisfaction, that's a losing proposition. Satisfied customer is not necessarily loyal. They don't necessarily want to do business with you. Satisfied customers are not good enough. What you need are delighted, and or enthusiastic customers. And so our model is arrayed around that central objective. It's an empirical model. It's a simple model, but it follows the data very, very closely. We found that there are some common factors in service and support strategy that characterize world-class desktop support organizations. They follow a common pattern when it comes to performance measurement and management. They have common characteristics in human resource management. And they're very proactive about getting a message out internal to the organization. So we're going to talk about each one of these 4 components of our best practices model, starting with strategy. And in a nutshell, this is all about unlocking the hidden value, the hidden leverage, if you will, in desktop support by focusing on end-user productivity and total cost of ownership. As I get into this, I want to present a paradox to you, and the paradox is this. Less than 5% of all IT spending is allocated to end-user support, and that includes the service desk and desktop support and field services. The remaining 95, 96% goes to application development, application maintenance, network operations, mainframe and mid-range computing, desktop computing, and then various contracted services like disaster recovery. But only 5% or less than 5% of IT budget is spent on end-user support. Now, unfortunately, this leads a lot of people to assume that there's very little upside opportunity in IT support. So it's viewed as a cost to be minimized. It's viewed as a necessary evil in some cases. We've heard some of our clients refer to service and support as a necessary evil, meaning we wish we didn't have to do it, but we kind of have to. At best, it's viewed as a keep the lights on function, meaning we know we need it, but we know that there's not much upside here. But they're wrong, and I'm going to show you why. Most support organizations are managed with the goal of minimizing costs, but the most effective support organizations focus on maximizing value. And there's 3 fundamental sources of value in service and support. One source of value is your ability to reduce and minimize total cost of ownership for service and support. Another source of value is your ability to return productive hours to end users. The shorter the mean time to resolve on a ticket, whether it be a service request or an incident, the quicker those users get back to work, the more productive time you save for them. Also, your ability to drive a positive view of corporate IT. The vast majority of opinion about IT is formulated through interactions with service and support. So let's look at each one of these, starting with the whole issue of TCO and driving value by minimizing total cost of ownership in service and support. What I'm showing on page 19 is the fully loaded cost per ticket in North America last year. At level 1, the cost was about $22. Again, this is all headcount, not only the frontline agents, but also the supervisors, team leads, workforce schedulers, trainers, and QA/QC people. We're looking at all their salaries and benefits. We're looking at office supplies, travel, training. We're looking at technology expense, and we're looking at telecommunications costs as well as the facilities expense, that is the space that you occupy. Take all those costs, divide it by annual contact volume, regardless of channel, whether it's a web chat, a live voice call, an email, a web submitted ticket, an email submitted ticket, a walk-in, a fax-in, it doesn't matter. All costs divided by all contacts, $22 last year. For desktop support, the number is $62. Now, these costs are additive. This is not an entire cost. In other words, if a ticket comes in at level 1, you're incurring $22. If it then gets dispatched out to desktop support, which we call level 2, you're adding $62 on top of that. If you then send it to field support, you're adding an additional, on average, almost $200. And if the vendor gets involved, you're talking about an incremental $500. So you can see that getting it done as low on this tree as possible makes sense. There's an expression in the industry, get it done at level 1. That's not just a catchphrase. It literally does help save the organization money. Now, if I were to turn this diagram 90 degrees to the right, you would understand the concept of shift left, which is big in the industry. Shifting left means you shift a level 2 ticket to a level 1 ticket, level 1 ticket to a level 0 ticket, meaning user self-help, or you turn a level 1 ticket into a level -1 ticket, meaning that the user never has the problem to begin with because they are either well-trained enough not to have the problem or the problem has been eliminated through root cause analysis. So shifting left in this diagram is really the equivalent of shifting down. The more you can push these tickets down, even to level 0 and level -1, the better, because it reduces your total cost of ownership on service and support. Now, the key to making this work is that you need a SPOC, a single point of contact support organization. In this diagram, what we've got is a user community out here. We've got our level 1 service desk here, and then we've got the N-level support, which would include desktop, field support, level 2 IT support, and vendor support. Now, key SPOC principles are these. The enterprise needs to take an end-to-end view of service and support. If you view these as siloed, that is, desktop support operates independently of level 1 support, field support is separate from level 1 and desktop, and so on. If you view this as a silo, you're not going to be taking an end-to-end view of user support. You give the customer a single point of contact for all IT-related incidents, questions, and problems in a SPOC, single point of contact environment. And the level 1 service desk is the SPOC. This is sometimes controversial. There are organizations that like to fight turf wars over this kind of thing, but the logical single point of contact is the level 1 service desk. Now recognize this does not mean that the level 1 service desk resolves every ticket, but it does mean that they are responsible for triaging the tickets. They are responsible for resolving at level 1 if and when possible. They're responsible for effective handoffs to N-level. N-level is any of these places out here where you can hand off a ticket to. Resolution, coordination, and facilitation is their responsibility. And closing tickets, now I'm ambivalent about this. Sometimes it makes sense to have level 1 close the ticket. Other times it makes sense to have N-level close the ticket. If you have other levels close the ticket, whether it's desktop support, field support, vendor, or whomever closes the ticket, there still needs to be a ticket chasing and monitoring function. This is just good service level management. That is, if you've got a ticket that's aging out here and it's getting close to violating the service level agreement, somebody needs to poke these guys and say, hey, this ticket's going to expire in an hour. You need to do something about it. At least call the user and let them know that you're not going to get it done within the service level, whatever it might be. So I'm ambivalent about where the ticket can and should be closed, but I do believe that the ownership should remain with level 1. They should close it in most cases, but if ticket closure is done by N-level, there needs to be some sort of a monitoring closed loop, if you will, whereby somebody's watching those service levels and prodding these people when they're in danger of a ticket going out of service level compliance. Now, one of the things that's necessary to make single point of contact work is that drive-bys, flybys, and snags are to be discouraged and frowned upon. Now, you've probably heard this terminology before. This is a scenario whereby a desktop support technician is walking past someone's office or someone's cube, and the person grabs them and says, hey, can you come in here and help me print this report? Or can you help me? I've got an Excel spreadsheet. I'm trying to turn rows into columns. In other words, I'm trying to pivot this thing. Or I've got Outlook. I've got to archive these old Outlook items. Can you help me do it? The proper response is you need to call the level 1 service desk. They will log a ticket, and if it makes sense to dispatch a technician, they will do so. Now, for an organization that has grown dependent upon using desktop support technicians like this, that is, they grab them when needed, they snag them, these flybys, that's a difficult thing for them to get used to, but it is absolutely the right thing to do. If you want to be serious about running a SPOC and minimizing your total cost of ownership in service and support, you got to put an end to these drive-bys, flybys, and snags. It's also sometimes called bypass. Bypass means this user doesn't want to call the service desk. They would rather call desktop support directly, rather call field support directly. They'd rather call the person in apps that helped them last time. That kind of bypass is very costly to the organization. So a good SPOC organization has every ticket originating at level 1 support, and then if necessary being dispatched out to these other N levels. That's one of the keys to minimizing total cost of ownership in service and support. And this is one of the fundamental sources of value that you can exploit and leverage in service and support, particularly at the desktop. Now, the single point of contact reduces total cost of ownership. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the data. We've got two sets of data here. There are fuchsia-colored squares, which represent the percent resolved level 1 capable when there is no single point of contact, service desk. And then the diamonds, the blue diamonds that is, represent the percent resolved level 1 capable when there is a single point of contact service and support organization. So the y-axis here is the percent resolved level 1 capable. Remember, these are the percentage of tickets resolved at desktop support that could have and should have been resolved at level 1. Now, when there is no SPOC, you can see that the average percent resolved level 1 capable is almost 23%. When there is a SPOC, single point of contact, the average percent resolved level 1 capable is 15.3%. That might not seem like a lot, but that's almost 8% of the total tickets. And if 8% of the total tickets handled by desktop support are incurring an incremental $62 per ticket. That adds up. So this is the proof, if you will, that shows SPOC actually saves an organization money by resolving more tickets at level 1. Ideally, you want to push the percent resolved level 1 capable even lower than 15% if you possibly can. Let's look at the second source of value. This chart is, looks pretty complex, and it is a little bit complex, but I'll take a few moments here right up front to explain what we've got. We ran a study a couple of years ago. 60 companies participated. That is 60 IT service and support organizations participated in this. And we benchmarked both their service desk and their desktop support organization, and we created a scorecard for each one of them. Service desk scorecard contained customer satisfaction, FCR, and mean time to resolve. The desktop support scorecard contained the same things, and then we organized each of these 60 companies into 4 quartiles. The best performing quartile were those that scored, were the top 15 companies that had the best service desk scores and the top 15 companies that had the best desktop support scores. The next group of 15, that is the runners-up, if you will, were in the second quartile. The next group of 15 were in the third quartile, and then those that performed the poorest, that is, that had the lowest scores in their service desk scorecard and their desktop support scorecard, were placed in the bottom quartile. The other thing we did within these companies, we looked at lost productivity per end user per year. We actually did a time and motion study, classic industrial engineering study, where end users within those organizations carried a stopwatch with them for a month. Not all end users. It was, we sampled, there'd be 10, 15 individuals per company. And what they did is they kept track of how much time they lost when there was some sort of an IT-related event. It might be that the network was down. It might be that they had a hard drive failure. It might be that their computer was stolen. It could be that an application was not working the way it was supposed to. But they were asked to time, and in some cases we know that when there's an outage, there's sometimes a workaround. But they were asked to, when they were completely out of pocket and couldn't work, track those hours. And when there's a workaround, track the non-productive time, meaning the hours that you lost simply because you're working not as productively as you would otherwise. Now, here was the stunning conclusion from this, is that if you work in a company where service and support is top quartile, you lose about 17 hours a year of productive time. Now, go back to a point that I made earlier. Your average knowledge worker has almost 3 devices now. They almost always have a cell phone. They're going to have probably 2 computers, a laptop computer and a tablet, or a laptop and a desktop, and some of them have as many as 6 or even 7 devices, multiple computers. They'll have, in some cases, servers and printers in their offices, and these knowledge workers require assistance and support. And when they need that assistance and support, the longer it takes to resolve that issue, the more productive time that they lose. But if you're lucky enough to be in a company that has a top quartile performing service and support organization, you only lose about 17 hours per year. By contrast, if you're unlucky enough to work for a company that is performing in the bottom quartile in service and support, you as an end user, you as a knowledge worker lose almost 47 productive hours a year. That's more than a full week of productivity. Now, the difference between quartile 1 and quartile 4 is about 30 hours of productive time per user per year. Put another way, if you've got hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of individuals, users in your company, multiply those 30 hours, the difference between quartile 1 and quartile 4, by the number of employees in your company, and you can start to see the real economic value of service and support. The quicker you're resolving these issues, the less downtime your end user will have. And I actually did a presentation on this at last year's HDI conference in Las Vegas that quantified, actually went through a case study and showed how much money, how much headcount, and what the imputed dollars were that an organization saved by having top quartile performance versus fourth quartile performance. This is an enormous source of leverage for service and support, but very few people know about it, let alone understand it. It's up to you. It's incumbent upon you to communicate this information and to make sure that key stakeholders, and I'm not talking about end users, I'm talking about others in IT, like your CIO, your Chief Technology Officer, key directors and managers, need to understand how value is created in service and support. One way is to maximize level 1 resolution rates. I just showed you that. The second way is to return these productive hours to end users. The chart up here on top shows the productive hours lost per employee per year on the y-axis. The x-axis shows the 4 quartiles. Again, there were 60 that participated in this study. The blue diamonds line up on top of each quartile. There are 15 of these blue diamonds in each quartile. And you can see that when we run the linear regression through the data points, that as the IT service and support performance deteriorates, you become a 4th quartile performer, the productive time lost increases. This is by far the biggest single economic contribution you make to the enterprise. Now, I have yet to see something like this for other areas of IT. And, I've asked our CIO clients whether or not they have anything for applications, for the NOC, for mainframe computing, and for the other areas of IT. Do you have something like this? Do you have a value proposition that shows what kind of economic contribution is being made by these other groups? And I haven't seen anything yet. So this is something that, in my opinion, is extremely powerful, extremely valuable for anybody who works in service and support. Because if you can demonstrate that the value you create is in excess of your annual cost per year, take a desktop support group and a level 1 service desk that in combination are spending $3, $4, $5 million per year. If you're a top quartile performer, you're going to be returning $8, $10, $15 million per year in productive time to those end users. This is critically important to understand because increasingly it's not good enough to just have good performance, good customer satisfaction, good FCR, low % resolve level 1 capable, happy customers. That's all great. But increasingly what's being demanded of service and support is show me the money. And this is how you show them the money. This is how you demonstrate your positive ROI, your positive economic contribution to the enterprise. Now there's a third source of leverage that I want to make you aware of that is also relatively unknown in the industry. And this is the leverage you have to influence customer opinion about all of IT. What I'm showing on this chart is the result of a survey more than 1,000 companies participated in. They were all big companies. You would recognize the names. It was a multiple choice survey, and each respondent could answer their top 3 choices, which is why when you add up these percentages, it's more than 100%. Okay, the question we asked them is, what drives your opinion of corporate IT? We didn't ask them about service and support. We asked them about corporate IT and what drives your opinion. The number 1 answer was service desk, 84%. The number 2 answer was desktop support, 47%. Now this is a stunning conclusion, one that was unexpected, but on reflection it makes perfect sense because your average end user doesn't spend a lot of time with applications, they don't spend a lot of time in the NOC, they don't spend a lot of time in the mainframe data center, but they do have frequent interactions with desktop support and the service desk. In fact, the average end user will talk to the service desk twice a month. The average desktop support person will talk to desktop support 3/4 of a time per month, meaning 3/4 of a ticket per month, which is 1.5 times every 2 months. So they do have frequent interactions with desktop support and service desk, even though they don't interact with other parts of IT. So naturally, you would expect them to draw conclusions about all of IT based upon their limited exposure to certain parts of IT, that being the service desk and desktop support. So there's a saying in this industry which is, as service and support goes, so goes all of IT. In other words, service and support is a proxy for the performance of IT overall. And if you're doing a good job at the level 1 service desk and at desktop support, your end users will recognize that. And they will infer that all of IT is doing a good job. And by proxy, they will assume that the CIO, the CTO, and other senior leaders within IT are doing a good job. In my opinion, for senior leader in IT, this is manna from heaven. This is a 4% function. Remember, less than 5% of total IT dollars are spent on service and support, yet it has this enormous impact on what end users think of all of IT. So if I'm a CIO or a CTO and I see this, I have to act on it. And what I'm going to do is not only make sure that the service desk and desktop support have the headcount, the dollars, and the technology and the training that they need, but I'm going to spend time down there every week. I'm going to spend an hour or 2 with service and support to find out what they want, what they need, because if they look good, all of IT looks good. And if all of IT looks good, I look good. That gives me credibility. That gives me job security. That gives me an enormous advantage over my peers in other companies. So this is the third source of leverage that you need to be aware of in service and support, the ability to drive a positive view of IT overall, the ability to return productive hours to end users, and the ability to minimize total cost of ownership by maximizing level 1 resolution rates. Those are the three fundamental sources of value that you need to understand in service and support. So now that we've covered service and support from a strategic point of view, let's talk about key performance indicators. Now, as I get into this, I want to suggest that this people process technology paradigm, which most people are familiar with, it basically says invest in your people first. Give them the training and the tools that they need. Then build processes, ITIL compliant or ITIL framework type processes that empower those human resources, and then purchase the technology, implement the technology, deploy the technology in such a way that it leverages the people and the process. Most people are familiar with that paradigm, people, process, technology, in that order. I want to submit that a more important foundation stone, if you will, in that paradigm is performance measurement. Now, I don't want to suggest that you can replace people with performance measurement. You can't do that. But what I am going to suggest is that without a strong metrics and measurements discipline, you have no prayer of being a world-class service and support organization. It's as simple as that. There is roughly a 1-to-1 correlation between service and support organizations that have a well-developed metrics discipline and those that are world-class, according to the definition I gave you about a half hour ago. A 1-to-1 correlation between the maturity of their metrics discipline and those that are world-class. In other words, you can't be great unless you have a strong performance measurement and management discipline. Now, page 26 shows you the 30 most common key performance indicators in desktop support. Now, don't panic. I'm going to slim this down and show you the 80-20 rule in a moment here when it comes to desktop support metrics. But these are the most common. We've got cost, quality, productivity metrics. We've got service level metrics, technician metrics, ticket handling metrics, and workload metrics, things like tickets per seat per month, incidents per seat per month, service requests per seat per month. But this only scratches the surface. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of desktop support metrics. These are the most common. These are the 30 metrics that we see the most often. Now, you can organize these into a different paradigm. 3 types of metrics that we call macro measures, underlying drivers, and causal factors. Now, the macro measures are your cost and quality metrics. These tell a story of your performance. When you tell somebody, hey, our cost per ticket is $90 and our customer satisfaction is 95%, that tells them something. That's an interesting story. So these metrics are good for communicating the performance of desktop support, but you can't control them directly. When I'm doing a benchmark, if I find that costs are high and customer satisfaction is weak, I can't go out there and just tweak cost or tweak customer satisfaction. But what I can do is tweak these underlying drivers, which include your productivity metrics, your service level metrics, your technician metrics, and your ticket handling metrics. These are the drivers of the macro measures. They're metrics that drive your performance. You can control these metrics directly, and it's through these metrics that you can influence the macro measures and improve your performance. And then finally, you got things that are outside your control but drive your workload. We call these workload metrics. Causal factors are things like the volume and mix of work performed by desktop support. Incidents typically take less time than service requests, for example. You don't have much control over these causal factors. They're largely a function of your environment. Now, one implication of this is the following. We get a lot of questions from people who say, and in fact, if you look at our LinkedIn groups, our desktop support LinkedIn group, literally every couple of days somebody will type in, hey, I've got 2,500 end users, how many desktop support techs do I need? That's really the wrong question, because we've seen 2,500 end users supported by a single desktop support tech. We've also seen 2,500 end users supported by as many as 50 desktop support techs. It's not a function of how many users you've got. It's a function of your environment. For example, these causal factors include the device count and mix. If you're in a gas and electric utility, the average end user has 1.2 devices. If you're in a financial services firm, the average end user has almost 5 devices. The mix of desktop and laptop computers will drive this. Laptops require more care and feeding than desktops. The number of mobile devices, how old those devices, how recently they were refreshed, how standardized your environment is, how virtualized your environment is. The user population density is a huge one. If you're in a high-rise building that say has 5,000 people in it, the travel time to and from a ticket is very short. You know, you get dispatched, it might take you a minute or two. You might have to go up or down in an elevator to get to that end user, but your travel time is short. By contrast, if you're doing user support on a big military base like Camp Pendleton out in California, you might only do 1 or 2 tickets a day because the travel time to and from each ticket is an hour or 2. The user work location, whether or not they're in an office, working from home, or out in the field, and lots of other factors are part of these so-called causal factors. So the question is not how many desktop support techs do I need per end user. The question is, what is the workload produced by those end users? Is it a ticket a month, or is it 1/10 of a ticket per month? Is it 3 tickets a month or 1 ticket per month? And what are those tickets like? Are they more service requests, more incidents? All of these factors will influence the workload, hence the number of tickets, the breakdown of incidents and service requests, and hence the staffing that you need. Again, we've seen environments where literally you only need 1 tech for every 2,500 end users. But we've also seen environments where there's 1 tech for every 25 or 50 end users. So the question is not how many techs do I need per end user. The question is, what's your workload? What's the travel time per ticket? How dispersed are your end users? And then I can start to tell you how many technicians you're going to need for that environment. Now, we've all heard this expression, if you're not managing it, you're not measuring it. If you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. I got that backwards. There are variations on this theme. What gets measured gets treasured, but there's a lot more to the story than this. Historically, key performance indicators were really used only to track and trend performance. But in that mode, you miss a lot of the value of the key performance indicators. So historically, it was all about measurement. Not much analysis was done, very little action planning, and as a result, almost no tangible or measurable action came out of your performance measurement discipline. But the value increases as you move up this pyramid. Action is more valuable than ideas and action planning, which is in turn more valuable than the analysis, which is in turn more valuable than the metrics themselves. But if all you're doing is measuring your performance and putting pretty charts on the wall, if it doesn't inform intelligent management actions and decisions that enable you to improve your performance over time, you're, to be blunt, you're wasting your time. So what we've seen emerge in the last 3 to 5 years is a holistic approach to performance measurement and management that de-emphasizes measurement and emphasizes action. Because after all, if you're not taking action as a result of your measurements, the measurements are pretty useless. They might be interesting, but if you're not acting on them, they don't mean anything. So minimize the number of measures, and I'll show you how to do that momentarily. Spend a fair amount of time on analysis. That is, you look at it and you figure out what it means. What are the implications of your performance measures? Based on that, what ideas, what action plans do you think are justified? And then do something with it. Act on it. The old Nike ads from 20 years ago were just do it. That's what we're trying to promote here. And world-class support organizations are nothing if not proactive. And I can tell you how well a service support organization will be doing after spending 5 minutes with them, just based on how proactively they think and behave, how willing they are to translate a metric into action. Because ultimately, that's what it's about. If metrics do not inform intelligent management decisions and actions that enable you to improve your performance over time, it's a waste of time. Simple as that. So here we got this big, ugly mix of metrics, 30 metrics, too much to handle, too costly, too time-consuming, not enough action. What I'm going to suggest is that we can boil it down to the 8 metrics shown on page 32. These are the ones that really matter. We've got our 2 foundation metrics of cost and quality, cost per ticket, customer satisfaction. We call them foundation metrics because everything you do in service and support should boil down to one of 2 things. You're either trying to contain your costs, that is, you're trying to do it efficiently, or you're trying to drive a higher quality customer experience. Nothing else matters. Viewed through that lens, you can greatly simplify decision-making in service and support. So whether it's a decision about new technology, about adding headcount, about reorganizing, about insourcing or outsourcing, or even something as simple as a beer bash on a Friday afternoon, if that does not have the long-term effect of either reducing or containing your cost or improving the quality of customer interactions, you just don't do it. It's as simple as that. So these are the foundation metrics. They they are the metrics that matter most: cost per ticket and customer satisfaction. But as I mentioned earlier, they cannot be controlled directly. What you do have control over are the underlying drivers. In a labor-intensive function like this, your big driver of cost is utilization. That is, how efficiently your technicians are utilized will drive your cost per ticket, and your first contact visit or first visit resolution rate will drive your customer satisfaction. This is first visit resolution for incidents. Also, mean time to resolve will influence customer satisfaction. Now, this is markedly different from level 1 support, where service levels really don't drive customer satisfaction. Service levels being your abandonment rate, your speed of answer, your percent of calls answered in 30 or 50 or 60 seconds. Those really don't have much impact on customer satisfaction. Customers are smart enough to realize that a long speed of answer doesn't mean a bad transaction. They look at it in the context of the overall handle time, and if it's 30 seconds versus 2 minutes, typically they don't care as long as they reach a competent person as measured by first contact resolution rate when they reach that level 1 person. But in desktop support, your service levels do matter, and specifically your mean times to resolve for both incidents and service requests will have a strong influence, secondary influence though on this, first contact resolution rate, but your mean times to resolve will also influence customer satisfaction. We've got a TCL metric here, the percent resolved level 1 capable. This is important because we want this number to be as low as possible. Remember what I spoke about earlier? The range is from 4% to an excess of 50%. The average is about 22%. Technician job satisfaction, a lot of people are surprised that we would put a metric like that on the short list, but the reality is technician job satisfaction is a bellwether metric that affects just about every other KPI in service and support. It is positively correlated with higher customer satisfaction, meaning high tech satisfaction is correlated with high customer satisfaction. It's also positively correlated with shorter mean times to resolve and shorter handle times, and it's positively correlated, or negatively correlated, I should say, with turnover and absenteeism, meaning that the higher the tech satisfaction goes, the lower the turnover, the lower the absenteeism. So what's not to like about that metric? It has a positive ripple effect on just about every other KPI in desktop support. And finally, I'm going to show you how to build a balanced scorecard, which basically aggregates all of these metrics into a single overall score that enables you to track and trend overall performance over time, and also enables you to compare yourself to other desktop support organizations. And I'm going to work kind of backwards here, starting with the balanced scorecard. Now, on this particular example, and you're welcome to copy this if you would like to, we'll be distributing the slides to those who complete the survey at the end of today's webcast. In this particular balanced scorecard, we include 8 performance metrics. We've got cost per incident, cost per service request. We've got customer sat, technician utilization. We've got FCR for incidents, percent of incidents resolved in 24 hours, mean time to complete service requests in days, and we've got technician job satisfaction. We weight each of these metrics according to its relative importance. Naturally, the foundation metrics of cost and customer satisfaction are overweighted. Metrics like technician job satisfaction, although important, are underweighted. Of course, these have to add to 100%. Then for a peer group, and this is important, if you're going to benchmark your performance, you need to benchmark yourself against a particular peer group. That means they've got to be comparable in scope, scale, complexity, and geography. Scope, meaning the scope of services provided. Scale, meaning volume of tickets they handle, because this is a scale-sensitive function. Geography and complexity. Geography, because it is labor-intensive, you don't want to be comparing a U.S. desktop support organization against a desktop support organization, for example, in India or the Philippines or even Eastern Europe, because the wage rates are so different. That is a significant influence on the cost per incident, cost per service request, and cost per ticket. But assuming that you have a reasonable peer group that is comparable in scope, scale, complexity, and geography, you want to show the worst performer in this third column from the left, the best performer in the fourth column from the left. So this represents your range of performance from bad to good. And then your performance would be put in the third column from the right. So this would represent your hypothetical performance. And you can calculate a metric score using this formula here. We take the worst case in the benchmarking peer group and we subtract your actual performance. That becomes the numerator of this ratio. We divide it by the range, which is the worst case minus the best case. And again, it's an interpolation formula that tells you how far along the path you are from the worst case to the best case scenario. If you get a high score, that means your performance is closer to the best case scenario. If you get a lower score, For example, here on technician utilization at 59%, that means you are closer to the low end of the spectrum than you are to the high end of the spectrum. So these metric scores will range between 0 and 100. You'll be at 100 if you have the best score in the comparison group. You'll be at 0 if you have the worst score in the comparison group. The final step in constructing the scorecard is to multiply your metric score by the metric weighting to come up with a balanced score over on the far right here. And when you add these together, you come up with a single number between 0 and 100%. Now you look at this and you say, well, what does this mean, 67.1%? Well, the first time you do this, it probably doesn't mean much of anything. But what it enables you to do is compare yourself to other desktop support groups. We've got roughly 70 desktop support organizations shown here on page 34. This is from a recent benchmark we did. Here's the score we just calculated, 67.1%. We went through that algorithm. You can see that the low score on the scorecard was 16%. That's over here on the far right. The high score on the scorecard was in excess of 86% over here on the far left. The average, and when we run literally hundreds of desktop support organizations through this algorithm, the average is only about 50%. It's a little more than 51% for this benchmarking peer group. That's what this red dashed line is going across here. So the scorecard allows you to compare yourself on a fair level playing field, apples to apples basis versus other support organizations, and you can also track it and trend it over time. That's what this data shows. This is from a client of ours from 2011. You can see that month over month, on average, their performance improved over the course of the year. Their desktop support scorecard went from 60% to nearly 80%. The purple background here represents the trailing 12-month average. So one thing you can do with this is track and trend it over time, update it monthly or at least quarterly. You can also compare yourself to other desktop support organizations. And think about what we've done here. We've taken a disparate set of metrics, some with units of dollars, some with units of percentage, some with units of days. We've normalized these. We've rolled them together, weighted them, and created a single number. And this is very intuitive. People understand a single score. They understand when you're being compared in a bar chart like this to others. They understand when your progression is in the right direction. So in any given month or quarter, you've got metrics that are oftentimes moving in different directions. And it's sometimes difficult to answer the question, are we better off this month than we were last month? Are we better off this quarter than we were last quarter? The scorecard is a very elegant solution to that dilemma. It gives you that single overall metric that you can track and trend over time that you can compare to other desktop support groups, and it enables you to answer the question, how are we trending, and are we trending in the right direction? Now, to discuss the remaining KPIs on the short list, we're going to use a benchmarking case study. But let me define benchmarking. Most of you, I think, know what it is. But for those that are not familiar with benchmarking, it involves comparing your desktop support group to that of a comparable peer group. Again, you've got to be comparable in scope, scale, complexity, and geography. So you compare the cost per ticket, you compare the first visit incident resolution rate, you compare the mean times to resolve, the agent job satisfaction, the customer satisfaction, and the like. Where you identify performance gaps, you need to diagnose why those gaps exist. So you look at what the peers are doing, those that are performing better than you, and you can selectively emulate them. That is, if they're doing something different, whether it be in workforce scheduling, training, performance measurement and management, their overall strategy for service and support, whatever it might be, you want to learn from them. And that's the real beauty of benchmarking, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve through trial and error, through incremental blood, sweat, and tears. You can literally bypass, leapfrog ahead of all of the incrementalism associated with most improvement initiatives and build upon the proven best practices of the industry's superior performers and achieve world-class performance not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. Now, for those who are interested in learning more about benchmarking, we've got white papers on our website about benchmarking. You're welcome to download those and read up more on benchmarking. But this is the single most effective tool we've found for enabling organizations to improve their performance and improve their performance dramatically. I mentioned earlier that there's a rough one-to-one correspondence between organizations with a well-developed performance measurement and management discipline and those that are world-class. The same holds true for benchmarking. Now, some organizations are great performers because they benchmark. Some of them benchmark because they're great performers. So the chicken or egg issue is, it goes both ways. The point is that The organizations that we find in this industry that are consistently strong performers, that are year after year scoring not just in the top quartile, but the top decile, the top 10% of the industry on desktop support, as measured by their balanced scorecard, they're the organizations that are benchmarking on an annual basis. Now, very early on, I presented a chart like this to explain what it means to be world-class. Basically, it means you operate on this upper optimized curve where the trade-off between cost and quality is as good as it can get. I'm using the chart for a different purpose here, and the purpose is to explain what benchmarking does for an organization. Now, they say there's no free lunch, but I would beg to differ. For any organization that is not yet optimized, meaning that you've got some inefficiency in the system, you have an opportunity to both reduce your cost and improve the quality of service that you deliver. And that's what benchmarking does for you. It identifies the inefficiencies in the organization. It identifies those opportunities where you can eliminate costs that are unnecessary and improve the quality of service so that you can move from this point where your costs are higher, your quality is lower, to this point where your costs are lower and your quality is higher. That's what benchmarking does for an organization. And that brings us to our second set of polling questions for the day, and there's actually two questions. Let me open up the first polling question here. And the question is this: has your desktop support function been benchmarked within the past 12 months? And then we've got a follow-on question. So have you benchmarked your desktop support within the past 12 months? We're getting good participation. We're already up to almost 60% on that. So if you'd like to weigh in on this question, please do so. Has your desktop support function been benchmarked within the past 12 months? Okay, we're at 85% participation. I want to give you a few more seconds to weigh in on this. By the way, while I do that, let me just shout out to some of the people on that. We've got a few hundred people on our webcast today, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. And I'm just going to call some names at random. Alan Barron, or Barone, thank you for joining us. Great to see you here. Janine Mutt, thank you so much. Great to see you here. Rhonda Tarley, glad to have you here. Steve Burke, glad you could join us. Steve Stout, thanks for joining us. And Thomas Smetana, thanks for being here. Okay, almost everybody has voted, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results of that poll with you. And here's the results. 75% of you have not benchmarked within the past year. 15% of you have benchmarked desktop support within the last year. And 9% not applicable, presumably because you're a consultant or you're some other industry analyst or something that is not affiliated with a desktop support group. Now, for those who have done it, congratulations. Hopefully you found it to be a worthwhile exercise. For those who have not benchmarked within the past year, I want to encourage you to seriously think about doing that, because it is the single most effective, most efficient tool to dramatically accelerate the performance of your desktop support group. As I mentioned, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve incrementally through trial and error. You can bypass all of that through benchmarking. It enables you to build upon the industry's proven best practices and achieve world-class performance, not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. So 76% who said no, I want to invite you to seriously consider benchmarking within the next 12 months. Let me open up the next polling question. This polling question is a follow-on to the one that I just asked. And it asks this: do you plan to benchmark your desktop support function in the future? And there's 5 choices here. Yes, within the next 90 days. No, or excuse me, yes, within the next 6 months. Yes, within the next year. No plans to benchmark at this time. And not applicable. So again, we're getting good participation. We're up to about 60% at this point. So please weigh in on this. Let us know if you do plan to benchmark your desktop support in the future. Next 90 days, 6 months, year, not at all, or not applicable. So please weigh in on that. Okay, we've got almost 90% participation now. If you'd like to weigh in, another couple of seconds you've got here before I close that poll down and share those results with you. Okay, so 11% of you are planning to benchmark your desktop support organization within the next 90 days, 20% within the next 6 months, 23% within the next year, and 37% have no plans to benchmark at this time. Recall from the prior polling question that 15% have benchmarked within the past year. So I'm hoping that that 15% is at least part of the 37% that don't plan to benchmark because they've recently benchmarked. And for the other 43, 54% of you, 11% within 90 days, 20% in 6 months, 23% within the next year, that represents 40, 54% if I'm not mistaken. Again, I want to encourage you to move forward with those plans because I think what you'll find in benchmarking is that it's a relatively low cost, not terribly time-consuming activity, but one that can dramatically accelerate your path to world-class performance and help you achieve world-class performance in a relatively short period of time. Again, getting there at a revolutionary pace, not at an evolutionary pace. Okay, interesting set of results. We're going to go into the remainder of the case study now, and what we're going to get to is, what I'm going to show you is some benchmarking data. Now this is real benchmarking data from a desktop support benchmark that we did a couple of years ago, but I want to caution you against comparing your own performance to this data because, as I mentioned earlier, when you benchmark, you have to have comparability in the peer group that you're benchmarking against. In other words, you need the same or similar scope, scale, complexity, and geography. And if you don't have comparability on those 4 dimensions, what you'll have is an unfair benchmark. Either you will have an unfair advantage or the peer group will have an unfair advantage. So real data, but I would caution you against comparing your own performance to this. Now, I'm going to make this real quick. I see several issues here. The cost is high. If we look at cost per ticket, cost per incident, cost per service request, it's well above the benchmarking peer group. There were about about 45 companies in this benchmarking peer group. So our costs are high. And remember, that's one of the foundation metrics. We want to minimize cost if we can. The other thing I look at is customer satisfaction. At 71%, it's 10 percentage points below the peer group. Okay, so we've got 2 red flags here. We've got high cost, low customer satisfaction. We need to figure out why. And we're going to use our case study to diagnose what's going on with this desktop support organization, starting with the 2 foundation metrics of cost per ticket and customer satisfaction. Think of it this way. When I put a desktop support group on this 2-dimensional chart where we've got cost on the x-axis, quality is measured by customer satisfaction on the y-axis, we've got lower cost on the right. That's somewhat counterintuitive. I've kind of reversed the axis, so as you go to the right, costs get lower. Go to the left, costs get higher. The y-axis is intuitive. As you move up the y-axis, your quality gets higher. Ideally, where you want to be is in this upper right-hand quadrant. This is where you're both efficient and effective, meaning that you have low cost and your quality is high. That's the holy grail for any service and support organization, whether you're level 1 support, whether you're desktop support, or any, even if it's non-IT related, low cost, high quality is a holy grail. Now, support organizations down here in the lower right have low cost, but they also have low quality, and what they need to do is improve their quality over time by improving incident first visit resolution rate and reducing their mean times to resolve. Those that are in the upper left-hand quadrant have high cost, but they also have high quality, and what they need to do over time is become more efficient by moving to the right. Now, those that are in the lower left quadrant have both high cost and low quality. That's the worst of everything. They need to both improve, that is, reduce their cost and improve the quality of service over time. So when you think about cost and quality, nothing else matters. Remember what I said? Nothing else really does matter. So you need to be focused on those 2 metrics, the foundation metrics. And if you're managing your costs at a below average level and your quality is in the top quartile, you're doing a great job. And that's what you ought to be striving to do day in and day out. Now, cost per ticket is driven by utilization. Technician utilization. Remember, this is a macro measure, cost per ticket. It tells an interesting story, but you can't act on it directly. What you can act on is one of the underlying drivers, which is utilization. So if we look at technician utilization, as this number improves, cost per ticket goes down. This blue data is, the blue diamonds are data points. The red line is the linear regression through the data. Not surprisingly, in a labor-intensive function, as utilization improves, cost per ticket goes down. So this is your big driver of cost per ticket. Now here's how we define utilization. We look at the ticket incidents and service requests handled per technician per month, and we multiply each of those by their respective work times, and we also factor in travel time per ticket. So the number of tickets handled by a technician in a month multiplied by the average handle time. We divide that by the number of working minutes in a month, which is about 10,600 in case you were wondering. Now, we don't back out sick days, vacation days, training time, administrative time, idle time where there's no tickets in queue, that kind of thing. We don't back any of that stuff out. We measure everybody worldwide in exactly the same way. Now, most desktop support organizations, to be quite blunt, don't track their incident work time. They don't track their service request work time. And they don't track their travel time per ticket. However, it is relatively easy and straightforward for a desktop support organization to do some sampling. That is, give your technicians some stopwatches for a period of time and have them keep track of their incident work time over a period of a week or a month. Have them track their service request work time over a week or a month. Have them track their travel time per ticket over a week or a month. And you can come up with some reasonable averages for what those are. Now, increasingly, there are applications, not just talking about desktop applications, but these are apps that you can download to your smartphone that allow you to put yourself in different modes. You can be in travel mode, you can be in work mode, you can be in idle mode, you can be in break mode, you can be in holiday mode, you can be in vacation mode, you can be in training mode. There are apps that can be downloaded, and I realize that most corporations have restrictions on that, and you've got to be careful. I'm not suggesting that you violate corporate policy or anything like that, but historically the reason that desktop support has not tracked things like incident work time, service request work time, and travel time per ticket is because they would claim we don't have the tools to do it. Well, there are tools now to do it, and I'm sure you've seen this. I mean, if you ever take a package, for example, from Federal Express or UPS, you know, when the delivery person comes to the door, they're holding a handheld device. They ask you to sign it, and you'll notice that they push different buttons when they're with you, and those buttons are putting them into different modes. They might be in delivery mode, i.e. they're out of the truck, they're delivering the package to somebody's doorstep. They're in signature mode. They're in travel mode, going back to their truck. They're in drive mode. So they put themselves in different mode using these handheld devices, and much the same way, about 25 to 30% of desktop support organizations are now allowing their desktop support technicians or requiring their desktop support technicians to have apps on their smartphone, an app on their smartphone that enables them to track their incident work time, their service request work time, and their travel time per ticket. So we're starting to get better data on this kind of thing. But even if you don't have an application, either a desktop app, a cloud app, or a smartphone app that enables you to track those three things, your incident work time, service request work time, and your travel time per ticket, you can still sample, as I mentioned, equip your technicians with a stopwatch for some period of time and have them track these metrics. And you can come up with a pretty good estimate for what those three metrics are. Page 47 just shows an example of how we would calculate technician utilization for an organization where the techs are handling 60 incidents and 24 service requests a month, 84 tickets total per month, incident work time 32 minutes, service request work time 59 minutes, and the travel time per ticket was 41 minutes, which is not unusual in desktop support. So we talked about technician utilization driving cost per ticket. What drives customer satisfaction? Well, we know that technician satisfaction has an impact. We know that the first contact resolution rate for incidents has an impact. And we know that the service levels, the mean times to resolve, have an impact. Here's the data that proves that. Blue diamonds are data, red line is linear regression. As technician job satisfaction goes up, so too does customer satisfaction. By the way, this is a number that you control, and I'm going to show you how you control it in about 5 minutes when we get to that section of our best practices discussion. As FCR increases, so too does customer satisfaction. So this is first contact resolution rate for incidents. Blue diamonds are data points, a red line is a linear regression. And the incident mean time to resolve, again, incidents, not service requests, as that number goes up, you can see customer satisfaction goes down. So the lower your mean time to resolve is, the higher your customer satisfaction is going to be. So now let's look at how training impacts a variety of these metrics. As new technician training hours increase, technician job satisfaction goes up. That's one of the levers you have to control technician job satisfaction is training hours. Technicians, not surprisingly, they like training, and it's evidenced here. As training goes up, technician satisfaction goes up. Why do we care? Because technician satisfaction drives customer satisfaction. Remember this chart here, okay? So training hours, increased new tech training hours improves technician job satisfaction. On an annual basis, the training hours your techs get also impact technician satisfaction. These blue diamonds on the y-axis here, these are organizations that provide no ongoing training for their technicians. Time on job, meaning technician tenure, as that goes up, your incident FCR goes up, meaning that the less turnover you have, the more experience you get with your technician workforce. The more experience you have with your technician workforce, the higher the FCR goes, and we know the higher the FCR goes, the higher the customer satisfaction goes. So now we've got this build where we've got our foundation metrics, driven by technician utilization and incident FCR, driven by service levels, technician job satisfaction, and finally technician satisfaction is driven by coaching, career pathing, and training hours, and I'll show you more on this momentarily. But this is what the cause and effect diagram looks like for the most important key performance indicators in desktop support. The ones that are in red are the ones that were on the short list. Remember I said less is more when it comes to KPIs. There's an 80-20 rule that applies here, and this is it. Cost per ticket, technician utilization, your mean times to resolve, your customer satisfaction, your FCR, and your technician job satisfaction. That's the short list of metrics that really matter, and this is the linkage that connects them all. And when you understand this, it gives you a great deal of power to pull the levers that you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. If you're trying to reduce your cost per ticket, you need to improve your technician utilization. Oftentimes to do that, you need to become less aggressive, not more aggressive, on your service levels. If your customer satisfaction is not where you need it to be, focus first on first contact resolution rate for incidents, secondarily on your mean times to resolve, and third on technician job satisfaction, which has a secondary impact on customer satisfaction. So these cause and effect diagrams are extremely powerful for helping you understand how to achieve desired outcomes. This really boils it down. This linkage, if you will, shows how the KPIs are interconnected and interrelated. It shows how they move each other. So we're back to our benchmarking data. High cost, remember that, and low customer satisfaction. Okay, we know our big driver of cost is utilization, so let's look at utilization. Technician utilization, 46% according to our definition, which I showed you a few minutes ago. Peer groups at 54%. Okay, so their utilization is low. Oftentimes, that can be a function either of service levels that are too aggressive or of an organization that's just overstaffed. In other words, they've got too many bodies there. And that was the case with this desktop support organization. They were slightly overstaffed, not hugely so, but the implication was that they needed to downsize a little bit. Now, in most organizations, you've got turnover, so you can downsize through attrition. Their turnover was 53% a year. It was more than double the peer group average. Well, 53% turnover can work in your favor if you're trying to downsize so that you can improve your technician utilization and get your costs under control. And it was a relatively quick, with this kind of turnover, again 53%, this organization simply didn't backfill as they attrited over a 3-month period of time. They got their utilization up to almost 60%, and they got their costs down to well below the peer group average. Pretty simple stuff. That's the real value of having KPIs and understanding the linkage of the KPIs. So the short story here is the same as the long story, which is that you're overstaffed, your turnover is high enough to attrit, so just don't backfill for the next 3 months. You'll see your utilization increase, and you'll see your cost per ticket, cost per incident, and cost per service request go down. Now, what about customer satisfaction? What's the big driver there? Well, it's first contact resolution rate for incidents, so let's look at that at 49%. It's well below the benchmarking peer group of 55%. We know that first contact resolution rate is driven to a certain extent by training hours, so we can look at the training hours to determine whether or not there might be a training component to the recommendation here. So new technician training hours, new techs get 10 hours of training compared to 46 hours for the peer group. Annually, they get nothing compared to 21 hours for the peer group. So here again, the short story is the same as the long story, which is that you really need to add to your training curriculum and start thinking about delivering more training to your technicians both initially and on an ongoing basis. Here again, fairly quick solution. Within 90 days, they had ramped up their training, and they saw their first contact resolution rate improve fairly dramatically to nearly 60%, and they saw their customer satisfaction rise to almost 85%. So the value of understanding these KPIs and their linkages is that it gives you a great deal of power to diagnose performance gaps, and more importantly, to do something about those performance gaps. Remember, it's action that we're after here, not the metrics, not the trend. It's the action that we're after here. Now, I'm going to save the Q&A for the end. I've got 2 sections to go, and they do go pretty quickly. I should be done in about 10 minutes here. But I'm going to save the Q&A for the very end. For those who do have questions, I encourage you to type them into the dialog box that is in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will stay on at the conclusion of the webcast to answer any questions that you have. But right now, we're going to get into the 3rd section of our model on human resource management. And what I've got here on page 60 is a cheat sheet of sorts that shows some of the best practices, not all best practices, but some of the best practices in human resource management for desktop support. We've got a shorthand for the best practice in the left-hand column. Then in the second column from the left, we show a bit more of a description of the best practice. And then on the right side, you see these cells, and in the upper right, you see these affected key performance indicators. So we've got mean time to resolve, we've got the percent resolved level 1 capable, we've got first contact resolution, utilization, customer sat, and cost per ticket. Now at the intersection of these affected KPIs and these industry best practices, you will have one of 3 colored cells. You will have a white cell, a light blue cell, or a dark blue cell. A white cell indicates that there is little or no cause-effect relationship between the affected KPI and the best practice. In other words, the way you recruit has almost no impact on your first contact resolution rate. But we found that it does have an impact on your percent resolved level 1 capable, meaning that if you recruit the right people with the right experience, your percent resolved level 1 capable will be lower. Now a white cell, as I indicated, shows little or no cause-effect relationship. A dark blue cell shows a strong cause and effect relationship. So not surprisingly, training has a strong impact on first contact resolution rate. By contrast, career pathing, which is an industry best practice, doesn't really impact FCR or MTTR, but it does impact this KPI here. So this is a bit of a cheat sheet that essentially says once you do your benchmark, to the extent that you find gaps in any of these affected KPIs, you can rectify, close these gaps using these human resource best practices. Now there are other best practices related to performance measurement and management, which we've been going through all afternoon here, but also related to service and support strategy, technology, stakeholder communication, and the like. But when it comes to human resources, these are some of the levers that you can pull to close performance gaps in any of these affected KPIs. So the idea here is that when you benchmark or when you compare your performance to some other organization, to the extent that you identify performance gaps, these are some of the human resource levers that you can pull to close the gaps in these key performance indicators. Focus on the dark blue cells. That's where you have the most leverage. Light blue cells, that's a weak cause-effect relationship, and the white cells represent little or no cause-effect relationship. Now earlier I introduced the balanced scorecard for desktop support overall. Here we've got a scorecard that can be used for individual technicians within desktop support. So mechanically this works exactly like the scorecard for the overall desktop support organization. The metrics are a little bit different. We look at customer satisfaction. This assumes that you can tie a CSAT survey back to an individual technician. In other words, you're measuring customer sat by technician. First contact res rate, again, assuming that we can measure that by individual. Incidents closed, which is a productivity metric. Service requests closed, another productivity metric. And then we've got some intangible metrics here. We've got teamwork, initiative, and mentoring. Those can be quantified on a scale of 0 to 5. 0 says you're doing terrible, 5 says you're doing a great job. So mechanically, again, this works exactly the same way that the scorecard does for overall desktop support. You put your performance here, and again, for these intangibles like teamwork, initiative, and mentoring, subjective metrics, we can put a number on those, 3.5, 5, 4.5. What this scorecard does is objectify what is otherwise a very subjective process. You all know, if you've been involved in delivering feedback before, or certainly all of you have received feedback before, it tends to be somewhat unsatisfying when the feedback is, yeah, you're doing a pretty good job, but I think you could probably, be a little bit better team player, and I don't think, your FCR is not great, so I think you can probably improve your FCR. The number of service requests you closed last month was on the low side, so you need to kind of ramp up your level of effort. If you're delivering mushy feedback like that, I think it's oftentimes difficult for a technician or anybody to take that feedback and act on it. But by quantifying and objectifying the feedback, as we've done in this scorecard, it becomes a very straightforward exercise to sit down on a monthly or quarterly basis with each technician and say, okay, well, you knew what was important to you because the scorecard was shown to you ahead of time. You knew that these were the 8 metrics in the scorecard. You knew how we weighted them, in other words, which ones were important. And we simply asked you to do the best you could, according to these weights and these metrics. So here's your score overall. And you can deliver feedback to this person. This person's taking a lot of initiative. They're doing well on mentoring. They're doing well on, they don't have a lot of unplanned absenteeism. doing pretty well, a number of incidents closed. Okay on customer satisfaction. They're above 50% here on this metric score. So you can deliver this kind of feedback. Where this particular person is not doing so well is on the number of service requests closed, not doing real well on first contact. They're kind of right in the middle when it comes to first contact resolution rate for incidents. Overall, they scored 43.7% when we run the math on this particular scorecard. What we can do is then show that person how they compare to others in desktop support. Now, we don't want to embarrass anybody, so we don't list any names out here on the left-hand side. Typically, each technician would be designated by a number. Here's their ranking for the month. Generally, you're going to show a 6-month trend in their performance. You can see that for this technician, they've definitely been improving. Last month, they were at 26.5. They're now at 43.7. Their 6-month trailing average is 27.6%. So clearly, this technician is improving his or her performance over time. Now, again, this is the intent here is not to embarrass anybody. The intent is to help each technician understand how they're performing very objectively, how they can improve their performance, where they need to improve their performance, and how they stack up relative to the others that are working in desktop support. One of the advantages of this is that those that are consistently struggling down here with low scores may come to the conclusion that, desktop support just isn't my thing. Either I'm not motivated, or I'm not passionate, or it just doesn't match my skill set very well, and they may choose to move on. That's not a bad thing. If somebody decides that this is the wrong position for them and they move to another opportunity, either within the company or someplace else, that really is not a bad thing. And that self-attrition is better than the kind of attrition that happens when you sit down with one of these people and say, hey, your performance hasn't been very good for a long time, so we're letting you go. You would much rather have them self-attrit than be told to leave, terminated, if you will. And so this individual technician balance scorecard solves a lot of problems for you. It gives you a device to deliver objective feedback. It helps you pinpoint where a technician can improve their performance. And for those that are performing consistently at the low end of the spectrum, it either motivates them to get their act together and improve their score, or as it happens in some cases, they will decide that this just is not the job for them and they leave the organization. So we've got these KPIs. This is the cause and effect relationship. I mentioned earlier that technician job satisfaction is a controllable metric. Too often I get the impression that people think, well, tech satisfaction just happens and it happens to be poor, which in service and support, technician job dissatisfaction is rampant. But the levers you have to control technician job satisfaction are the amount and quality of coaching, the existence of a formal career path, and the amount and quality of training that they get. That is how you manage technician job satisfaction, and it is worth managing because it does have an impact on absenteeism and turnover, and it does have an impact on customer satisfaction. So it does make sense to proactively manage technician job satisfaction. Now let me show you how career path impacts job satisfaction. The blue diamonds here are agent satisfaction when they have a career path. The fuchsia-colored squares, agent job satisfaction when they do not have a career path. When there's no career path, the average agent job satisfaction is 72%. When they do have a career path, the average agent job satisfaction is almost 81%. So we're not just, talking, pulling facts out of the air here. We have data that proves that quality and amount of coaching, the existence of a bona fide documented career path, and the quality and quantity of training hours does have an influence on technician job satisfaction, and it does make sense to pay attention to these and to invest in these because they do have this secondary positive effect on other metrics in desktop support. Let's talk now about marketing. We observed a long time ago, nearly 20 years ago, that there were many support organizations that were doing a really good job, yet their reputation internally was not very good at all. We've heard terms like, and this refers to level 1 support, of course, but the help desk, the hopeless desk, the helpless desk. You've heard those terms before. They're derogatory, and there are similar terms for desktop support. Yet what we found oftentimes was that, gee, your internal reputation is really not good, but our benchmark shows that you're performing pretty well. Now, we wondered why that was the case, and the answer is pretty obvious when you think about it for a few minutes, and you've heard this before. When a customer has a negative experience with desktop support or level 1 support, they tend to tell several people, multiple people. They might tell 10, 12, 15 people. But when they have a good experience, they don't tell anybody. And so over time, although you personally may have had good experiences with desktop support and level 1 support, you hear the buzz around the office. Oh, they lost my ticket. They were supposed to come this afternoon and replace the hard drive, but they didn't show up. So, and that same person who told you they were supposed to show up this afternoon and they didn't probably told 15 other people. So bad news spreads far and wide. Good news doesn't go anywhere. And over time, what happens is people start to think, wow, support must be really doing something wrong because I hear all these horror stories. The reality is they could be doing an excellent job, but they're not managing their message very well at all. So what we observed is that there is a difference between the actual value delivered by desktop support and the perception of that value that's being delivered by desktop support. Now, the only locus of points that makes sense on this chart is the diagonal. This is where the perceived value is equal to the actual value. So if your actual value is low and the perception of actual value is low, well, at least the perception is fair. If the actual value is high and the perception of the actual value is high, again, that's a fair perception. But that's not what happens typically. Normally what happens for desktop support and level 1 support is that you end up here in the lower right-hand corner. It's red for a reason. Red means danger, green means good. So over time, because the negative stories get repeated and perpetuated, even though your value might be quite high, those negative stories tend to wear down the perception. And oftentimes there's a gap between perception and reality. This is where the perceived value is less than the actual value, and you end up down in this lower right-hand corner. Now, this is a danger zone. It's dangerous because decisions are based on perception, not reality. So if the perception is that desktop support is not very good, they can't get their act together, they lose tickets, they forget to escalate, all this other kind of stuff, decisions will be based on that. And it could be a decision not to fund it appropriately, not to staff it appropriately, not to approve projects for desktop support. Could be a decision to outsource or insource that is not the right decision. And we're neither pro nor con outsourcing or insourcing, but we do believe it should be done for the right reasons. And oftentimes, if there's a big divergence between perception and reality, these decisions will be bad decisions because the perception and the reality are so far apart. And so what we want to do is make a distinction between true value, operational effectiveness. Every organization should be moving to the right over time to improve their actual value. But you have to be mindful of this other dimension. We call it brand management, and you've got to be able to close this perception gap, because if you're down here in this red zone, you're living on borrowed time. And over time, decisions will be made that are adverse to service and support based on incorrect perceptions. And so MetricNet has developed this model. We call it the 5W model. We actually have a half-day workshop on this. And the 5 Ws are this. Define the stakeholders. Who are they? Define the messaging. What are the key messages? Define the timing. When are you going to communicate your messaging? Where and how do you reach these stakeholders? And then a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, why are we doing this? There's a bit of a punchline at the end of this that I'll share with you. Again, I'm boiling down a half-day workshop into about 2 minutes here. In terms of timing, you want frequent contact with your users. At new employee orientation, there should be a brief overview of service and support, both desktop support and level 1 support. When a user logs in, there should be messaging about how to reach support. Click here to chat, click here to talk, here's how you can reach us, here's our hours of operation. Whenever IT training is delivered, there should be a module on service and support. During an incident or service request itself, you should be managing user expectations so that they can expect when there will be a resolution. And at scheduled sessions, much like what we're doing right now, an increasing number of MetricNet clients on a monthly basis, or in some cases even more often, they'll do a webcast internal to their company. And they'll just do a half hour or 45 minutes on here's who we are, here's what we do, here's our hours of operation. If you want support, here's how you reach us, here are the kinds of things that we can do for you, and here's what to expect in terms of turnaround time. For messaging, there are a number of messages you need to get out there. Services you offer, key initiatives that you have underway. Perhaps you're implementing a remote diagnostic tool like BombGuard or GoToAssist, for example. What are your performance levels? There should be an online FAQ. So for frequently asked questions, there is a set of solutions that can be implemented by resourceful end users. And your success stories. Let end users know about some of the things you do well. Absent any other improvement, we found that just communicating with end users goes a long way to close this gap between perception and reality. In other words, if your performance doesn't change at all, but you start communicating effectively, frequent timing, multiple messages, using all channels available to you, the perception will improve, and that gap between perception and reality will close. Now, in terms of channels, newsletters, we recommend a quarterly newsletter go out from service and support to all end users. Reference guides, online reference guides. Of course, you do your periodic customer satisfaction surveys, and you ought to share the results of those surveys with the customers. Login messages that communicate key information. And then user liaisons. These are individuals that agree to act as the eyes and the ears of support with the end users. So you might have a user liaison for human resources, one for distribution, one for sales, one for marketing, etc. And their job, one of their jobs, I should say, is to keep track of what users are saying about service and support and communicate that back to desktop support. Likewise, they communicate messages to their constituents that you ask them to communicate. For example, if there is a new tool available for password reset, as an example, tell the user liaisons in addition to putting it in the newsletter, the reference guide, and so on and so forth, so that the user liaisons can let the end users know about the password reset tool. So use all available channels, be communicating as frequently as possible, and consider multiple messages. Now, you've heard this expression before, that expectations not set or expectations not set or expectations not met. So we need to be serious about closing this gap between perception and reality. More than a dozen years ago, a client of mine sent this comment to me, and I think it's more true today than it was back then. And the punchline is this: why do we have to delight customers? Why can't we just satisfy them like we used to? And the answer is this: because there's too much at stake. Because desktop support is the gateway to IT for many end users, and you have a disproportionate influence on what those end users think about all of IT. You have an obligation to deliver high-quality service to them, to not just satisfy them, but to delight them, to make them enthusiastic. Remember our model, customer enthusiasm? That's your goal, that's your obligation, because you are the gateway to IT for the vast majority of end users. And what you do, the quality of interactions that you deliver at that interface, reverberates throughout the organization, and it has far-reaching implications for the entire enterprise, for all of IT. So take that responsibility seriously and recognize that your actions at this interface do have those far-reaching implications and do reverberate throughout the organization. In summary, what we can say is that managing this gap between perception and reality is pretty straightforward. It doesn't take a lot of time, nor does it cost a lot of money, but it is critically important. We've found that the success of level 1 and desktop support depends as much on your image as it does on your actual performance. That's pretty profound. The vast majority of organizations focus only on their performance. But if you're not also focused on your image, you're missing a big opportunity. This is not a question of bragging or beating your chest or anything like that. It's a question of making sure that you get credit for the quality of service that you deliver to your organization. The benefits are numerous: customer loyalty and positive word-of-mouth referrals, credibility, which leverages your ability to get things done. It drives a positive image for IT overall, and it results in high levels of customer satisfaction. So let's summarize what we've learned today. We started with a 4-part model that addressed strategy, performance measurement, human resource management, and marketing or messaging. Think strategically. You focus on adding value by being preventive and proactive. You should be part of an end-to-end support process. Remember the single point of contact, the SPOC, Service and Support Organization. You should understand TCO, which emphasizes both first-level resolution rate and first contact resolution rate, and understand how value is created. Remember 3 fundamental sources of value. You can minimize TCO, you can return productive time to end users, and you can drive a positive view of IT overall. So understand how value is created. When it comes to performance measurement, remember, less is more. You just need 8 KPIs, including the scorecard. You should be benchmarking annually, and understand how the KPIs are linked. Understand that linkage, the cause and effect relationship between the key performance indicators. That gives you a great deal of power to achieve desired outcomes. When it comes to human resource management, view this holistically. Training and development is not just motherhood and apple pie. It can dramatically improve the effectiveness of your technicians, but also reduce absenteeism and turnover, improve technician morale, which has a positive impact on customer satisfaction. Your technicians should have a documented, bona fide career path. They should get frequent coaching and feedback, but they should be held accountable. And I showed you a model scorecard or a sample scorecard that you could use to help drive that accountability. And finally, when it comes to marketing, think about your brand and how you actively manage your brand. You need to keep in mind that perception and reality are two different things, and you need to make the gap between perception and reality as narrow as possible. Desktop support is a key driver of IT perceptions, and it's incumbent upon you to communicate the value that you create for the organization so that you can minimize that gap between perception and reality. So the bottom line on desktop support best practices is this. Desktop support is now being managed as a strategic asset within the enterprise. It can reduce the overall cost of IT, it can dramatically improve the productivity of end users, and it can drive a positive view of IT. Now, strategic desktop support functions have a number of success factors in common. They're almost always part of an end-to-end support process. They understand the economics of TCO. Remember, get it done at level 1. They engage in active efforts to maximize both first contact and first level resolution. They use performance indicators diagnostically. They invest in technician training, coaching, and career pathing. They actively manage their internal marketing and messaging efforts. They aggressively promote and communicate the value delivered by desktop support. So I've got 6 suggestions to get you started. And by the way, in a minute, I'm going to get to the questions that are queued up that have been typed into the dialog box and conduct a Q&A session. But I do want to make a few closing remarks. First, I want to encourage all of you to look around our website and become a free member. This gives you access to all of MetricNet's online content. Connect with us on social media. We put out a steady stream of information and, that IT support professionals may find useful. In the copy of the presentation itself, we provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Don't forget to register for upcoming webcasts. We've got them scheduled through June, and within the next few days, we will have them scheduled out through the end of 2014. So please visit our website, sign up for the webcasts that you're interested in. They're, of course, always free of charge. Please feel free to browse through our resource library on MetricNet's website, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, magazine articles on everything from service desk best practices to desktop support best practices. For those that are interested in benchmarking, there are at least 3 ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, we have our peer group benchmarks that compare your desktop support function or your service desk to a unique peer group that are comparable to your service desk or desktop support group. And these are our custom benchmarks. They're very comprehensive in scope. Secondly, if you are only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button, and you'll see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. And then for the do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Don't forget to look us up. If you're attending the HDI conference in Orlando next month in April, MetricNet will be delivering 2 presentations on metrics and benchmarking. The first presentation is on desktop support metrics. The second presentation is on the ROI of support. Also, if you're interested in scheduling a meeting with MetricNet at the conference, you can go to this URL, metricnet.com/HDI-2014, and you'll see a tab that pulls up a calendar where you can reserve a meeting time with MetricNet. Now, you can reach MetricNet at this phone number in the United States. It's 703-992-7559. You can also reach us through web forms at metricnet.com, or just send us an email at info@metricnet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I will be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Let me take a look at the questions that we've got here. Okay. Okay. Let's see. From James. Can you give examples of the details with the average incident work time? Does this reflect such things as replacement of internal parts of laptops, malware cleaning, computer re-imaging? A computer re-imaging, James, would typically be a service request as opposed to an incident. Malware cleaning would probably be an incident. Replacement of internal parts, it might be, it's most likely going to be a service request as opposed to an incident. But in terms of average work time, I would say that the data that was presented, several pages back, is not a bad place to start if you're just looking for some averages for work time. So let me go back to that data, and we'll take a look at those averages. Here we go. Okay, move my question dialog box. Let's look at the work time. Okay, average incident work time, 65 minutes. Average service request work time, 119 minutes. Average travel time, 18 minutes. But you can see that there's a huge range here from minimum to maximum. So the range will vary pretty dramatically. Actually, I read the wrong numbers. I'm sorry, James. Here's what I meant to read. Average incident work time, 49 minutes. Average service request work time, 94 minutes. Average travel time per ticket, 23 minutes. You can see the min to the max, though, varies pretty dramatically. Average incident work time ranges from 38 to 77. Service request work time ranges from 80 minutes to 110 minutes. Now, that's for this particular peer group. As I've mentioned numerous times in this presentation, you need to make sure that you compare yourself to a comparable peer group so that you have that fair comparison of incident work time, service request work time, and travel time per incident, per service request, and per ticket. Okay, let me get to the next question here. I hope that helped, James. Let's see, from David, can you get a copy of the slides? The answer is yes. Just fill out the survey. When you exit the webcast, go to webinar, should pop up a survey for you that you can complete. James asks, have you worked with K through 12 school districts? Yes, we have. Says, what can you tell us about them? I don't know. What do you want to know about them? That's an open-ended question that could take a long time to answer. So if you have a specific question about K through 12, please type it in, or else you can contact MetricNet, and I can discuss with you desktop support both in a K through 12 environment as well as a higher ed environment. Okay, Paul asks, you mentioned some apps for smartphones to use to track times for text. Can you recommend any? We don't like to do that, Paul, just because we want to remain vendor neutral. Even if it's a free app, we like to remain vendor neutral. So we don't recommend any, but you can find them pretty quickly. Just doing a quick internet search, you'll find apps out there that enable you to download to your smartphone and then put yourself in different work modes. And then at the end of the day, end of the week, you can upload that information to a cloud that will compile the statistics for you for that day, for that week, for that month, that allows you to look at work time, travel time, technician utilization, and the like. From Travis, I noticed that you sell benchmarks on the website, but do you offer service to come in-house and look at our organization to help us with measures and suggestions? Am I getting the whole question there? Measures and suggestions. The answer is yes. If you're interested, Travis, send an email to info@metricnet.com or feel free to call us. I showed you a phone number on the prior page here. You can call us at that number there, or you can send us an email. Okay, from Charles, to increase value to the business, do you see desktop teams doing more business enablement activities like running productivity teams that educate or focus on returning end user feedback to IT to drive improvements? We've not seen a lot of that, Charles. You're talking about using desktop support as sort of a feedback mechanism to the rest of IT. We've not seen a lot of that, but it's certainly something that can be beneficial to the rest of IT because, after all, both desktop support and the service desk have more contact with end users than just about any other part of information technology. And so for those organizations that do have a closed feedback loop, if you will, meaning that they take insight and suggestions from end users and they feed those back up the IT value chain to the rest of IT. It's a smart thing to do, but not that many organizations are doing it right now. Okay, from James, how do you differentiate a ticket that takes 10 minutes to resolve compared to one that may take 10 hours? We don't. And that's just the way, that's the nature of this activity. It's true at level 1 support, it's true at desktop support. Some tickets you get lucky and they're 10 minutes. Some tickets are way, way more complex. You know, it could be a very complex move add change that involves a re-imaging and a bunch of other stuff, and it might take 10 hours. That's the nature of this game. So we don't really differentiate between them, but over time, what you get, the 10-minute tickets average out to 10-hour tickets, and so over time, you get some balancing, if you will, between the extremes on both ends of the distribution. So if you draw a distribution for the work time per service request, the work time per ticket, the work time per incident, you're going to get a distribution with tails that go out, in your case, to 10 hours on the right and tails on the left that are only 10 minutes. And over time, those things are going to balance themselves out. But in terms of differentiation, no, we don't really do that because the statistics will take care of that. And if you look at a large enough sample size of data, at least a month, but ideally a quarter or 2 quarters worth of data, the 10-minute tickets are going to balance out the 10-hour tickets, and you're going to come up with an average for the work time, the travel time, per ticket, per incident, and per service request. Okay, from Peter, are there best practice questions to use for your technician satisfaction survey, and how often is this recommended to be done? Are they specific to coaching, training, and career pathing? I'll work backwards on that question, Peter. Yes, they are specific to coaching, training, and career pathing, but there should also be a question in there about how satisfied are you overall with your position at company X, Y, Z. So a short number of questions for the technician survey. You should survey them once a year or, if possible, twice a year. These surveys don't take long at all. They take 15, maybe 20 minutes. They should be fewer than 5 questions, usually measured on a scale of 1 to 5. You do ask about coaching. You do ask about training. You do ask about career pathing. But there also has to be the ultimate question, which is overall, how satisfied would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is I'm ecstatic about this position, to 1 is I'm planning to turn in my resignation because I don't like working here. So I can send you a sample survey if you're interested. Just send me an email at info@metricnet.com. But you should be doing it at least once a year, ideally twice a year. Short survey, it only takes 15 or 20 minutes. You can even set it up on a tool like SurveyMonkey. You do want to include the 3 questions you asked about, coaching, training, and career pathing, but make sure you also ask the overall question, how satisfied are you with your position here? Okay, from Kevin. Let's see. The question says, survey, I'd like to get that finished, and we have 3 techs here that are well over our time budgeted for the seminar. Okay. So basically, Kevin's saying that I took too long and they had to bail out, so that's fine. I can, since he's not here, what I was going to say is that for those that are interested in receiving a copy of the sample technician satisfaction survey, you can email me at info@metricnet.com. Okay, next question is from Ray. I was hoping I could get a copy of the PowerPoint as well as the recording. I'd like to go over this with our management team. Yes, within the next couple of hours, you will receive a follow-up email that has a link to the recorded webcast and also has a link to, not the PowerPoint, but a PDF of today's presentation. So assuming that you fill out the questionnaire, Ray, when you exit the webcast, you will get a follow-up email that contains both of those items. From Ray, is it too late to sign up for the conference? I assume you're talking about the HDI conference, and I'm not sure if it is or not. I had heard from somebody earlier today that they tried to sign up and that it was full, but you could still give it a shot. Go to thinkhdi.com, click on events, click on HDI 2014. The conference is down in Orlando, and you can find out, I think, from there whether or not you're able to register at this point. Okay, from James, K-12 schools, what was the most efficient setup noted for desktop support? It really depends on how many end users you've got. Typically in a K-12 environment, if you're only supporting the faculty and staff, it's usually not a huge number. If you're also supporting students, then the number grows pretty dramatically. But in terms of setup, there are certain environments where it makes sense to have hybrid techs, meaning that they do both level 1 support and desktop support. We call that a jump and run model, where if a call comes in or a ticket comes in and you can't resolve it remotely, you jump, you run, or not literally run, but you get up, you go to the side of the user, and you fix the problem. So in high-density environments, which schools are, and in low-volume environments, which schools are if you're supporting only faculty and staff, then a jump-and-run model, a hybrid tech model, usually works pretty well. However, when your volume gets too high, i.e. if you have more than about 12 or 15 technicians, you need to start segmenting level 1 support from desktop support because you will be missing some scale economies if you try and do the hybrid model when you're north of 12 to 15 technicians. So that's just one piece of the answer, James, in terms of the most efficient setup. I had assumed from your question that that's what you were asking, is in terms of setup, do you have technicians that do both level 1 and desktop support? And again, in a high-density environment with relatively low volume, hybrid technicians make sense. But you don't want all your technicians cross-trained to do both level 1 and desktop support, because we found that level 1 technicians, good level 1 technicians, are not necessarily good desktop technicians, and vice versa. However, about 20% of the population of good desktop support technicians are good at level 1 support, and vice versa. So you don't want to cross-train everybody. But if you do get some cross-training, say 20, 25% of your staff, that does facilitate an evening out of the workload so that you can jump and run, and so that you can balance the remote queue, meaning the level 1 service desk queue, with the desktop support queue. I hope that helps. Okay, are there other questions? That was the last question that's been typed in. If you do have a question, please type it in. Okay, from Peter, do you have different benchmarks for those hybrid support groups? The answer is yes, because that's a unique model for support, both level 1 and desktop support. And so if you're going to benchmark a support group that does both remote and desktop support, you do have to benchmark against other organizations that do the same thing. You can't benchmark against pure desktop support or pure level 1 support. It's not a fair comparison. So the answer to your question, Peter, is yes, we have hundreds of instances in our database of organizations that do have a hybrid model, that have technicians that do both level 1 support and desktop support. Okay. Question from Stephen. Should the service desk and desktop support team fall under the same management? Not necessarily. I believe it does help, but it all depends. I mean, if you've got a weak manager, that's a bad thing. You'd rather be split up, and hopefully you get at least one good manager, one over desktop support or one over the service desk. So if you've got a weak manager managing both, it's not a good thing. But if you've got a good manager over both, in general, it is a good thing. I do think it helps to have a strong manager that both desktop support and service desk report to, because it's easier to manage an end-to-end support process when they report up to a single manager. But it is not a prerequisite to success. I want to make that clear. You don't absolutely have to have one manager, desktop support and service desk, reporting up to one manager to be successful. What you do have to have is competency in both management positions, desktop support and service desk, and you have to have cooperation between the two. If you've got the two C's, competency and cooperation, you'll still do very well. In general, I prefer to see a single manager over both support groups, but it is not absolutely necessary to be successful. Okay, question from Gary. How do I get the survey? Well, when you exit the webcast, a survey should pop up, Gary, from GoToWebinar. It's just 3 questions. You fill those out, and we'll send you a copy of today's presentation. From Paul, how do you account for those folks who work on multiple tickets at once, say rebuilding a laptop PC, working on a support call? You handle them just like you would any other ticket. I think that the real question you're asking is, how do you keep track of how much time they would spend on the laptop, how much time they would spend on the PC, how much time they spend on a different ticket? And that's going to be difficult to answer. However, at the end of the day, if you know that the work time was 6 hours and that individual technician worked on 4 tickets, you know that on average the work time per ticket was 1 1/3 hours or 1.5 hours. You have 6 tickets, 4 hours. 4 tickets, 6 hours. You know that each ticket was about 1.5 hours of work. So you just average it out. And this is quite common, by the way, to have technicians working on multiple tickets at one time. But what you have to do is, at the end of some period of time, typically one day, you look at the number of tickets closed, you look at the time spent in work mode, you can run the division and determine the work time per ticket. So what you're describing is pretty common. Now, it is harder, I'll admit, in desktop support to get good metrics for work time and travel time. Because in level 1 support, you got the ACD, which will pick up wait time, talk time, after call work time. It's all automated. In desktop support, nobody's figured out how to do that yet. So it has to be done manually with one of these applications I talked about, or some desktop application, presumably connected to the cloud, where you upload your statistics on a daily and weekly basis, and you get back reports that show you what your utilization is, what your handle or your work time per incident, service request, and ticket is, what your travel time is. So it is harder to keep track of these things in desktop support than it is at level 1 support, because it's automated at level 1. But it is worth doing at desktop support because it gives you tremendous insight into how you're managing your workload and whether or not you're staffed properly and whether or not you're deploying your human resources in such a way that your utilization is good, and hence your cost per ticket is as low as it can be. Okay, are there other questions before we wrap up here? Okay, it doesn't look like there are any more, so I just want to thank all of you once again for joining our webcast today. I do hope you found it to be insightful and informative. Don't forget to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Appreciate the opportunity to present today's best practices for desktop support. This concludes our webcast. Goodbye now.